Looking out the window, I saw the genuine queen of our neighborhood doing exactly what I had suspected all week, while seated at my art workstation sketching a princess for my latest children's book. With her small loudhailer and clipboard, our HOA president, Nancy Carter, was nonchalantly tossing a gift from my porch into her bag, as though it were her God-given entitlement. This is third time this week. I knew I had to act, but I had no idea that other eyes, those with a government badge, were also observing her. Comment with a phone emoji if you are viewing on your phone. Comment on the computer using a computer emoji, since this article will make you want to toss your gadget at least 3 times. Moving to Maple Grove 6 months ago, I felt I had discovered heaven. With white picket fences, groomed lawns, and tiny little front porches, where I might picture friends waving and chatting about weekend barbecues, the neighborhood looked like something straight out of a suburban dream. Leon Brooks here makes his living illustrating children's books. Hence I work from home and cherish silence over nearly all else. My small studio was ideal, facing the front yard from where I could see delivery vehicles and find inspiration in the changing seasons. I felt I would have permanently avoided the anarchy of flat life and intrusive neighbors. Exactly 3 weeks after I had moved in, that illusion was broken when I got what I could only call a royal summons. The notice, written on official HOA letterhead, included terms like mandatory attendance and community compliance orientation. The tone was so professional and directive. You would have expected me to be ordered to appear before a federal judge instead of to attend a neighborhood meeting. The letter told me that, as a new resident, I had to show up for an orientation to find out about our community values and expectations. That was set at 7 p.m. crisp at the community center. The red ink underlined twice the sentence, "No exceptions will be made for scheduling conflicts." Entering that community center was like going into a courtroom in which I was the defendant and everyone else served as the jury. About 15 of the inmates seated in tidy rows and folding chairs seemed like they would rather be somewhere else. Nancy Carter was at front of the room, and I understood right once that this woman considered herself as the unquestionable monarch of our small suburban country. She was most likely in her late 30s, with a severe bob cut and bleached blonde hair that matched her own using kitchen scissors. She looked like a decorated military officer with her outfit. A faded purple hoodie seen better days, but covered in at least 6 different HOA pins and badges. Her outfit consisted mostly of a little portable loudhailer, strung from a chain around her neck. Nancy started the meeting by tapping her loudhailer 3 times to grab our attention, then launched into what she called the Maple Grove Community Standards Manual. Even though the room was small enough that she could have whispered and everyone would have heard her precisely, she started reading rules with the fervor of someone announcing lottery numbers after opening a binder easily 3 inches thick. Rule number 1. Mailbox numbering has to be obviously visible from the street and cannot be more than 2 1/2 inches in height. Second rule. All delivered packages have to be taken off porches and locked indoors 2 hours after delivery to uphold visual standards. Third rule. Strongly forbidden personal surveillance equipment, including cameras, recording devices, or monitoring systems aimed at shared areas or adjacent properties breaches our community trust policy. She carried on thus for 47 rules. Yes, I counted. And every one seemed more ridiculous than the next. Since I had been thinking about a doorbell camera for security, I gently raised my hand and asked about the rationale behind some of the more strange policies when Nancy finally stopped for questions. Nancy's attitude changed right away and was disturbing. Her pleasant neighborhood welcome mask dropped, and I could see something far colder under, emphasizing my name like it tasted horrible in her mouth. "We have very specific standards here, Mr. Brooks," she stated. The way she described creative person made it sound like a communicative disease. Standards that some people find challenging to meet, but I'm sure a creative person like you will figure it out. The other residents started to find their shoes interesting, and I knew I had somehow made myself a target by posing very legitimate inquiries. I felt uncomfortable walking home once the conference stopped, but I hoped I was only overanalyzing things. Perhaps Nancy was having a difficult day, or perhaps HOA leadership drew in controlling types. I poured some tea, got into my evening schedule, and began to draw ideas for my next project. I looked out my front window about 9:30 to see weather. I had left anything on the porch, and there she was, standing at the end of my driveway with that huge folder in her hands. Nancy Carter was jotting notes straight ahead toward my house. She was not also trying to be understated about it. She did not wave or grin or show any guilt at being caught when she saw me staring. Rather, she kept writing, looked at my house one more time, and then left with the slow, methodical pace of someone wanting to make sure I know I was being watched. Exactly 8:15 the next morning, the opening shot in what I now consider to be the Maple Grove package war showed up in my email inbox. The subject line, violation notice, immediate compliance required, seemed spam for a second. Regretfully, it was quite real and quite different from Nancy Carter. Dear Mr. Brooks, it started with the kind of formality typically saved for court paperwork. Yesterday evening's routine community inspection revealed that your mailbox number falls around 3 millimeters outside our stated 2.5 inch standard. This transgression of our aesthetic standards calls for quick rectification to preserve the visual harmony of our area. Please fix this within 72 hours, failing which your HOA agreement section 12 describes possible consequences. Persuaded I was misreading something, I spent a whole minute staring at the email. 3 millimeters? This woman was grumbling about 3 millimeter mailbox numbers, half expecting to find Nancy right, and I had somehow missed an evident infringement. I took a ruler from my art tools and marched outside to measure my house numbers. Not 3 millimeters over, not 1 millimeter over, just what the guidelines call. The numbers measured exactly 2.5 inches. Making ensuring the ruler was in every picture, I snapped several from numerous angles for perfect evidence. Then I put together what I felt to be a factual and courteous reply. I appreciate Nancy bringing this up for me, but after careful measurement using a standard ruler, I discovered that my mailbox numbers are exactly 2.5 inches as specified. I have included pictures for your perusal. Tell me whether you require further material, please. Nancy returned within an hour, and any pretense of neighborly concern had vanished entirely. Mr. Brooks, your defensive posture and aggressive tone obviously go against our community harmony rules. Your need to question my authority with images points to an alarming trend of noncompliance, going beyond basic measurement concerns. More closely monitoring your property will help me to make sure other violations are not taking place. The email was sent to the whole HOA board, transforming an apparently minor miscommunication into a big show. I was starting to realize that this had nothing actually to do with community standards or mailbox typefaces. This concerned authority, and Nancy Carter was resolved to find just who possessed it in Maple Grove. 2 days later, the garbage can incident occurred, and it was so small that I nearly found it unbelievable. Like every other resident, Tuesday was garbage day in our neighborhood. The night before I had dropped my can at the curb, placing it exactly where the other cans were positioned, not obstructing any driveways or sidewalks. I had been especially careful. I heard activity outside at 7 o'clock in the morning and looked out to find Nancy standing next to my upturned trash can, rubbish all over the street. She was definitely positioning another violation and had her clipboard out, recording what she was wearing, her trademark sweatshirt. She really waved and pointed at the mess, like she was doing me a favor by bringing it to my notice when she saw me observing from the window. I hurried outdoors to gather the dispersed trash before it flew into adjacent yards or choked storm drains, throwing on a jacket. Nancy came up with her loudhailer ready as I bent in the ground, putting coffee grinds and banana peels back into the can. Mr. Brooks, I fear your trash can was placed incorrectly. It constituted a safety risk and was restricting pedestrian access. I moved it to a more suitable spot on my own initiative, but sadly it looks the lid wasn't properly closed. Her tone was so sickly sweet I felt my teeth hurt. Every word was picked deliberately to make her appear useful and to make me look negligent. The worst aspect was that several neighbors had come out to investigate the noise and were all observing me slink about gathering trash like some sort of community service punishment. Nancy was unaware that the night before I had taken pictures of my correctly positioned garbage can in case she attempted something like this. Having also captured the other cans on the street for comparison, it was clear that mine had been placed precisely as everyone else's. I forwarded these pictures to the HOA board along with a thorough complaint about Nancy's actions once I had cleaned the mess. I felt like I was rebuffing instead of merely accepting whatever punishment she decided upon. For the first time since moving to Maple Grove, the board answered quickly and shockingly favorably. Nancy received a formal warning from them. She also had to make a public apology email to every resident on the value of accurate paperwork prior to acting in corrections. The email Nancy sent apologizing was a masterwork of passive-aggressive compliance. I'm sorry for any misinterpretation of the Mr. Brooks garbage receptacle situation. Although my priorities were keeping community safety standards, I admit that my documentation might have been lacking. She managed to apologize without really admitting wrongdoing, and the phrase necessary corrective actions made it evident that she considered herself the law enforcement officer for the neighborhood. In the future, I will make sure that all evidence is completely gathered before acting in any required manner. Nancy seemed to interpret this as escalation rather than backing down following criticism, and I felt as though things were about to get a lot worse. About 2 a.m. that evening, I woke up from footfall on my front porch. Living alone had made me a light sleeper. I had learned to tell the difference between things that belonged in typical neighborhood noises. These footfall were careful and wary, the kind someone takes when attempting silence. I slipped to look through the slats toward my front door from my bedroom window. Examining my mailbox area, a dark figure with a flashlight was wasting far too much time staring at something that ought to have taken 30 seconds to inspect. Although the figure was too far away and moving too gently for me to discern particular features, the general height and build seemed familiar. The person swiftly vanished around the side of my house when a car passed, and the headlights momentarily lit my porch, leaving me wide awake and wondering whether Nancy Carter's fixation on community standards had descended into actual harassment. The first delivery vanished on a Thursday afternoon in early March, and I spent 3 days persuaded it was only a shipping error. For a client assignment valued roughly $200, I had bought a set of professional watercolor paints and certain brushes and planned delivery between noon and 4 p.m., complete with a picture of the item laying on my doorstep next to my welcome mat. The tracking data stated delivered to front door at 2:47 p.m. When I examined my porch at 5:30, though, all I found was the mat and some dead leaves blown over from my neighbor's yard. First, I called the shipping company, then the art supply store. Everyone reassured me that packages do not suddenly disappear and would most likely show up in 1 day or 2. 1 week later, the second box vanished precisely, and it was then that my eye for patterns began to kick in. This year it was a birthday present for my 8-year-old nephew, a set of building blocks I had bought with adequate time for delivery and gift wrapping. Once more, the tracking revealed good delivery at 2:15 p.m., replete with a picture, and once more the parcel vanished from sight. About 4:30, after grocery shopping, I reported a police incident when getting home. The officer who recorded my statement appeared bored this time and advised me to maybe think about acquiring a delivery box or having things delivered to my job. Package theft is rather common these days, he added, hardly looking up from his paperwork. Usually, simply children seeking simple targets. Once they see you have nothing intriguing, it will most likely stop. It was at this point that I began to notice the timing and patterns of my absent parcels. One of my sketchbooks has a basic chart recording delivery confirmation times against my own schedule and the overall rhythm of neighborhood activities. What I came upon was fascinating. Both bundles arrived during busy afternoon hours, when most folks were still at work. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, though. When Nancy Carter made her daily community patrol walks around the neighborhood, I had seen her routine, since she always carried that large tote bag and her clipboard, stopping to check mailboxes, measure lawn heights, and note possible violations. I began closely observing Nancy's walks, positioned myself at my front window in the afternoon when parcels were usually delivered. From a behavioral standpoint, what I saw was amazing. Nancy visited every property in our portion of Maple Grove, but she spent much more time looking at homes where delivery vehicles had lately stopped. She had a big canvas tote bag that seemed empty at the start of her walks, but by the time she got home it looked distinctly heavier. Her body language around mailboxes and porches where parcels had been delivered was most instructive. She would pause, looking about to see if anyone was observing instead of her typical rapid documentation procedure, then approach to investigate whatever had been left. After seeing Nancy walking into my neighbor's house just minutes after a delivery vehicle had placed a gift on their porch, the confrontation I had been preparing for eventually took place on a Tuesday afternoon. I got my jacket and strolled outside leisurely, timed my appearance to line Nancy's arrival with my own mailbox. "Good afternoon, Nancy," with my warmest voice. "You seem to be walking by really frequently once shipments arrive. That is quite committed community service." She reacted right away and clearly. She grabbed her tote bag tightly near her body and stepped back as I had caught her engaged in activity inappropriate for her AAS HOA president. She answered, "That's my responsibility." But her voice had that protective tone I was beginning to notice. Some residents are not correctly securing their deliveries, which puts community liability problems. Nancy's answer was so exactly non-denial that I knew I was headed for something. She had not objected to being around during delivery. She reasoned for it. She had not denied having taken anything. She had accused neighbors for neglecting to guard their property. Most crucially, she had essentially acknowledged that she thought unsecured parcels needed her action as an issue. "I have a few packages missing lately," I remarked, closely observing her for any response. "The delivery firm claims they delivered them, but when I reached home they were absent. Have you observed anyone in the neighborhood acting suspiciously?" Nancy's demeanor changed to what I could only characterize as deliberate concern, the look of someone ready for this particular dialogue. Nancy responded, "Oh, that's terrible," and her tone felt like it had been practiced, just exactly compassionate. "You know, lately, package security has caused some problems in this neighborhood. You might want to look into having items delivered to your place of employment or a delivery locker. Leaving priceless objects on porches for hours at a time is not particularly safe." Her description of valuable items made my skin crawl, as if she knew personally what was in packages not within her purview. She was basically offering me guidance on how to avoid the precise crime I suspected her of committing, and doing it with the appropriate helpful neighbor tone. It was psychological manipulation at its best, and it made me wonder if I was paranoid while yet indirectly confessing her guilt. I stayed on my porch for a long time considering the talk and what it exposed after Nancy turned away. An innocent person would have naturally questioned what was in the missing packages. She had not asked that. Someone truly worried about community safety would have responded differently, not offering to assist me search for them or compile reports. Rather, she would have immediately concentrated on preventive measures meant to remove her chance to pilfers, implying she knew exactly why packages were vanishing and how to stop. Nancy Carter was not only a boundary-conscious HOA president with control problems I came to see. She was a crook covering her misdeeds and gaslighting her victims under cover of authority. Unknown to me at the time, a man called Daniel Crane had been filming Nancy's interactions with packages and neighbors from a dark automobile parked across the street. Working for the Law Enforcement Division of the United States Postal Service, Inspector Crane has been looking into 3-month trends of systematic mail theft in Maple Grove. The name Nancy Carter had up in enough victim reports to call for monitoring, and my lost goods were merely 2 objects in an expanding evidence file. A federal inquiry was developing a case that would finally destroy Nancy's whole organization while I was playing amateur investigator from my front window. But I wouldn't find out about Inspector Crane's participation for several more weeks, during which Nancy's behavior would go from little larceny to something far more severe. Setting up a surveillance camera seemed like crossing a boundary I hadn't wanted to cross, but Nancy Carter made it quite evident that polite talk and HOA complaints wouldn't address my package theft issue. After looking at possibilities over a weekend, I settled on a basic doorbell camera that would provide a clear view of my front porch without being overly conspicuous or costly. The installation was simple enough for me to perform on my own, and within a few hours I had high-definition video covering my front door area. Empowerment mixed with melancholy. Empowerment because I was at last controlling the circumstances, and sadness because I had to treat my own neighborhood like a crime scene. The first serious test for the camera came exactly 5 days later when I ordered a fresh batch of watercolor paints to complete the project postponed by my earlier missing box. wanting to replicate the same circumstances under which my deliveries had vanished. I made sure to be far from the house during usual delivery hours. Based on the timestamp, the delivery vehicle showed up at 2:23 p.m. The driver positioned the product exactly where I had instructed, clearly visible but not instantly noticeable from the street. I kept away until 4:15, allowing plenty of time for any possible robbery to take place before going back home to review my camera footage and porch. Obviously, the package vanished, but this time I had proof. The camera had caught everything in perfect clarity, and what I saw was considerably more purposeful and planned than I would have expected. Nancy Carter arrived to my doorstep at 2:51 p.m., carrying her usual tote bag and paperwork. But her demeanor was very different from her regular neighborhood patrol schedule. She spent almost 3 minutes looking at my box rather than her usual fast documentation and tripped to the next house. She grabbed it, flipped it over to study the mailing label, and seemed to be evaluating its dimensions and possible worth. This was deliberate evaluation by someone who knew exactly what she was doing, not opportunistic theft by someone who happened to be strolling by. Nancy's body language and knowledge of her surroundings added even more negative impact to the footage. She looked up and down the street to be sure nobody was watching before walking up to my porch. She studied the package and positioned herself to conceal the view from the street. She didn't merely grab it and dash like a scared amateur when she at last decided to take it. She gently put it in her tote bag, straightened her paperwork to make things seem normal, and left using the same measured pace she used on her community patrols. This was someone who had done this many times previously and had created a mechanism to go undetectable. Equipped with indisputable video proof, I concluded it was time for a straightforward confrontation. When I asked Nancy if she might come over to talk about a community safety concern, she responded with the same type of eagerness that suggested she expected to catch me in some sort of infraction. 15 minutes later, she showed up at my front door bearing her paperwork and sporting an official worry that I could now clearly identify as absolutely phony. "Mr. Brooks, what do you need help with?" she asked, and I could tell she was already crafting whatever speech she intended to give on appropriate package security or community responsibility. I grabbed my phone and showed the security camera footage instead of responding to her inquiry. Nancy responded straightforwardly and clearly. Her face grew white, then red, then turned to a kind of frantic rage I had never seen before. "You think you're so smart," she snipped, and all pretense of neighborly care vanished. "I have been defending this area for 6 years from people like you, people who do not know what it takes to preserve standards and keep property values up." With every statement, her voice grew louder and more desperate. I knew I was seeing the actual Nancy Carter, not the well-crafted HOA president image she always gave. "People like me?" I asked, really perplexed about her meaning. Nancy's answer exposed just how far her fantasies stretched. Those who believe they can enter a settled community and modify everything to fit their needs. Individuals that challenge power and bring about issues not seen before. Since the day you got here, you have been nothing but trouble. I have been observing you, recording everything, compiling a case against you. The irony was incredible. Here was a woman who had been methodically pilfering goods from her neighbors, persuading herself that I was the offender for being caught in the process. She waved at my phone. "This is illegal surveillance," she said. "I'm phoning the police right now to report you for privacy law infractions." Nancy did call the police, but the exchange did not proceed as she had hoped. Deputy Spencer listened to Nancy's complaint about illegal spying when he arrived 20 minutes later, and then demanded to view the video that had sparked the allegation. Having seen the video twice, he went to Nancy with a professionally neutral but obviously dubious attitude. "Ma'am, you are seen in this video picking up a gift from Mr. Brooks' porch. That is federal crime. That is postal theft. About this incident, I need some questions answered." Nancy's answer was sheer anxiety covered in wrath. "That is not exactly what happened. I was shielding the parcel from pilfering. This area has had issues with package security. I was checking it for safety." Deputy Spencer was mentally compiling Nancy's actions and reactions for his report, not buying her narrative. "Ma'am, why did you not leave a note or contact Mr. Brooks informing him Where the package was if you were keeping it safe. And today, where is the package? Nancy's response exposed just how desperate she was growing to be. I am not required to respond to these inquiries. Here I am the HOA president. Hence I have every right to uphold community security standards. She was essentially asserting, which even I understood was absolutely illegal, that her position gave her the right to take property belonging to others. Deputy Spencer gave me his business card and said something that made me shudder. "Sir, about this event today, a federal mail inspector wants to talk with you. You apparently are not the only resident of this area to document missing packages." Inspector Daniel Crane was professional, cool, and utterly indifferent to suburbia drama, just precisely what I would have expected from a federal law enforcement agent. Most likely in his mid-40s, he had the kind of subdued assurance derived from years of dealing with those who believe they are smarter than the law. 3 hours after Deputy Spencer left, he arrived at my door carrying a big document and exuded an attitude implying he understood far more about my predicament than I did. "Mr. Brooks, I am Inspector Crane from the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General. I would want to go over some material that would pique your attention, since I know you have been experiencing trouble with missing packages." Over the next hour, what Inspector Crane told me fundamentally altered my perspective on events in Maple Grove. Nancy Carter was not just pilfering my goods. She was running a sophisticated thievery operation throughout 3 separate communities for the past 8 months. "We have reports from 67 distinct victims," Inspector Crane said, "with overall damages calculated at more than $18,000. Your security camera footage is the first actual evidence we have found showing Mrs. Carter in the act of theft, and it's exactly what we need to proceed with federal charges based on." Nancy's business covered an astounding extent, and I came to see that my missing art supplies were only a small portion of a much bigger criminal enterprise. Opening his file, Inspector Crane gave me printed screenshots from an online selling account known as Maple Grove Finds, which had been listing and selling goods matching the description of stolen parcels. "Mrs. Carter has been running a methodically ordered operation," he said. "She targets homes using her HOA presidency, tracks delivery patterns, pilfers parcels at prime times, and then posts the contents online. Mr. Brooks, this is hardly small-time larceny either. This is organized retail fraud with large federal fines, along with hundreds of other products I could identify from delivery vehicles I had seen around the neighborhood." He showed me pictures of my lost watercolor paints posted for sale online. Inspector Crane's idea was simple but brilliant. We had to catch Mrs. Carter in the act one more time, with federal agents positioned to make an instantaneous arrest. We would set up a high-value box to be delivered to my location, with a GPS tracking device inside that would let us trace her to any place she stole items from. She touched that parcel, and we would have all the proof we required for several federal charges. I accepted right away, since the thought of becoming bait in an FBI sting operation was both horrible and fascinating. After months of helplessness and victimizing herself, I was finally going to assist Nancy Carter in getting justice. Nancy's growing urgency, as she sensed something was shifting the neighborhood dynamic, surprised me. Nancy scheduled an emergency HOA meeting to handle what she claimed to be a major threat to community security and privacy the day following my talk with Inspector Crane. The meeting announcement distributed to every resident alleged that some of them had been engaged in unlawful surveillance operations, violating our community trust, and maybe putting every other resident under criminal liability. Before I could reveal her misdeeds, she was obviously trying to turn the neighborhood against me, and her approach was smart enough to make me worry it may really work. Nancy's emergency conference was masterwork of misdirection and manipulation. Presenting the risks of home monitoring devices, she stood at the front of Community Center, carrying a fresh folder titled "Privacy Violations and Community Safety." "Unauthorized recording devices create legal liability for our entire community," she said to the 15 people that had bothered to show up. "One resident violating the privacy rights of another puts all of us in danger for possible lawsuits and criminal charges. For very good reasons, we have policies forbidding spying. So, such policies have to be followed to safeguard everyone." She was basically saying that, with such power, Capturing criminals was worse than being victimized by them. Several of the people nodded along. Nancy's presentation's way she positioned herself as the victim of my harassment and intimidation strategies was particularly unsettling. She said I had been photographing her without permission, following her at her community service events, and utilizing the footage to fabricate claims of her moral failings. Mr. Brooks has created a hostile environment that makes it difficult for me to perform my duties as your elected representative, she stated, straight-faced. His actions exactly show the kind of divisive influence endangering the peace and safety of our community. She was clearly recounting her own acts while asserting to be the victim of them, and doing it so convincingly that I could see some locals staring at me with mistrust and criticism. Although Inspector Crane had cautioned me that when confronted, desperate criminals sometimes intensify their actions, I was not ready for Nancy's next action. The modest handwritten note smile, "You're being watched and federally tracked," was left on my front door the morning of her emergency meeting. Though the handwriting and passive-aggressive tone clearly belonged to Nancy, it was not signed. The message had the opposite impact from what was obviously supposed to scare me and cause paranoia about my own monitoring system. By threatening a federal witness, Nancy was clearly afraid enough to face more criminal charges. Hence, Inspector Crane's strategy was already succeeding. Nancy Carter's rule of terror in Maple Grove was almost over, and her most dangerous and last move would be her next one. The morning of the federal sting operation felt to me like the quiet before a storm I had been getting ready for without knowing. Inspector Crane had set up his surveillance crew in inconspicuous cars all over the area, and between 2 and 4 p.m. a specifically prepared package, including electronic monitoring tools, was planned for delivery at my home. Designed to look like pricey electronics, the kind of high-value item Nancy had demonstrated a particular taste for stealing. The box would let federal investigators monitor its whereabouts in real time once she removed it. Once Nancy moved, I was supposed to act entirely normal, follow my usual schedule, and let the pros handle everything. As it happened, acting normal proved far more difficult than I had thought. Every sound from outside made me leap, and I found myself staring out windows for indicators of Nancy's approach or delivery trucks and monitoring the clock continuously. Although Inspector Crane had told me to be indoors and avoid interacting with Nancy until after the arrest, the waiting made me very nervous. Around noon, I decided to concentrate on my artwork to keep my hands busy and my mind occupied. But even that, I kept thinking about everything that had led to this moment, from that first dubious HOA meeting to Nancy's increasing criminal behavior, and wondering if I was doing the right thing by helping to set her up for federal charges. The delivery truck showed up exactly at 2:37 p.m., and I observed from my front window as the driver positioned the bait package where my other deliveries had been pilfers. Exactly the kind of item Nancy would have noticed on her afternoon patrol. The box was rather larger than normal and had the name of the kind of shipping business usually handling pricey gadgets. Inspector Crane had informed me that although federal agents were positioned at several points surrounding the area, ready to go as soon as Nancy touched the package, I could not clearly detect any indication of their presence. From Nancy's point of view, the entire operation was meant to seem very normal, just another delivery in a neighborhood where she had been effectively pilfering goods for months. Nancy, though, did not arrive at her regular hour. Arriving at 2:50 p.m., she lacked her trademark tote bag and clipboard. 3:15 passed, 3:30 then 400. Still nothing. I began to worry that she had somehow discovered what was happening, or that her evening meeting had startled her enough to alter her behavior. Nancy was obviously wiser and more experienced than I had first given her credit for, and Inspector Crane had cautioned me that criminals occasionally get instincts about when they are under observation. When I texted Inspector Crane at 4:30 to inquire about if the operation had failed, his reply was only, "Patience. Despondency has a chronology." As nightfall fell, I began to unwind and figured nothing would happen that day. After making dinner, watched some TV, and tried to persuade myself Nancy might have at last understood the hazards she was running and choose to stop pilfering parcels. Feeling rather let down that the day had gone without incident, I went through my usual nighttime ritual and nestled in with a book about 10 p.m. Having been psychologically ready for conflict and resolution, the anticlimax made me uncomfortable and inadequate. According to Inspector Crane, federal agents would keep surveillance through the night, but I figured they were simply being meticulous and that nothing would really happen after dark. I miffed it. My front door opening startled me back to consciousness at 11:32 p.m. I thought for a while I was dreaming or mishearing things, but then I heard footsteps in my living room and the clear sound of someone moving around my furniture. My immediate impulse was to dial 911, but the matter became considerably more convoluted when I heard a voice I knew. Nancy Carter was at my house talking to herself in a frenzied whisper from my bedroom that I could hardly hear. Where is it? Where does she store the proof? Must be somewhere. Has to be evidence of her actual behavior. I snuck to my bedroom door and listened as Nancy rifled my living room, obviously searching for something particular. As she searched for whatever she was looking for, her voice grew louder and more frantic. Drug money. Has to be money for drugs. Until they are laundering money, nobody orders this much art supplies. Where can one find the drugs? The financial records are located where? She was creating a complex conspiracy theory to explain her presence in my house, persuading herself that I was the actual criminal and that she was investigating citizens. The delusion was so total and so detached from reality that I came to see Nancy Carter had lost contact with any objective view of her own behavior. Nancy was standing in my living room with her torch pointed at my art supplies, shooting everything with her phone as if she were recording proof of criminal behavior when I eventually built up the bravery to approach her. "What the devil are you doing in my house?" I yelled, turning on the overhead lights, and shockingly her phone dropped. Her answer exposed just how far she actually had gone. "Seeking proof of your transgressions. Although you seem so intelligent, I know what you are actually doing here. Unless they are engaged in some sort of money laundering activity, nobody requires this many artistic tools." Holding one of my paint brushes as though it were a blazing pistol, she was confident she had found evidence of my intended criminal activity. Nancy's break-in was her last, most desperate attempt to control a situation that had spun far beyond her grasp. She had grabbed the bait package on her way into my house, and federal investigators were already following its whereabouts to her garage, where they would shortly find the whole extent of her stealing scheme. Nancy, however, knew none of that yet. From what she knew, she was looking at my criminal behavior in a moral manner. My indignation at her being in my house was merely more evidence of my crime. When I threatened to contact the police, she ran via my rear door, leaving behind proof of breaking in to add to her mounting federal charges. Within minutes, Inspector Crane gave me a call to verify Nancy had grabbed the bait package and that federal investigators would be carrying out dawn search warrants. With Nancy Carter's criminal enterprise in Maple Grove ending with a morning, the whole community would at last see justice served. Maple Grove saw something suburban areas never see at precisely 6 a.m., a coordinated federal law enforcement operation replete with many government cars, armed agents, and military precision search warrants executed. From my front window, I watched as unmarked cars encircled Nancy Carter's house. Then federal agents and uniformed police proceeded with the type of cool efficiency that results from years of running similar operations. Many still in their jammies and robes, clutching coffee cups and cell phones as they sought to grasp why their peaceful neighborhood had suddenly become the focus of a federal inquiry. The entire street came alive. The arrest of Nancy was exactly what I had hoped for. She was hauled from her residence in a worn bathrobe, her usually immaculate bob messy, and her face showed the kind of dread that results from suddenly facing consequences for actions she had convinced herself were right after months of harassment and thievery. Watching federal agents perp walk her past the neighbors she tormented was like the most fulfilling moment of my life. The handcuffs seemed especially fitting on someone who had spent so much time trying to control and restrict the behavior of other people. Children were asking their parents why the terrible lady was being jailed. Several residents were freely documenting the entire event with their phones, therefore assuring that Nancy's public humiliation would be recorded and remembered. Nancy's garage search exposed the actual extent of her illicit activity, and even I was astounded by what federal authorities came upon. Inspector Crane said the area had been turned into what he described as a professional theft and resale operation, with systematic shelves organizing stolen goods by value and type, a dedicated photography station creating online listings, and shipping supplies for distributing sold items to consumers around the nation. Not only Maple Grove, but the garage also possessed evidence of theft spanning more than a year, with thorough records proving Nancy had been pilfering packages from dozens of neighborhoods across 3 other zip codes. One of the first neighbors to find their stolen goods among the evidence was Rick Dawson, who had assisted me in cleaning up following Nancy's trash can sabotage. When he spotted agents carrying a familiar set of equipment from Nancy's garage, he said, "My golf clubs." She informed me they most likely had been taken by youngsters from another area. From Christmas gifts that never arrived to crucial papers vanished from mailboxes, other people soon started identifying objects they had reported missing over the prior several months. Recovering items totaled more than $25,000, representing hundreds of families whose systematic thievery operation had affected them. Inspector Crane told the assembled audience that Nancy Carter's activities went beyond mere parcel theft. Mrs. Carter was running a sophisticated retail fraud scheme, he told the neighbors gathering to observe the search. She identified target homes using her HOA presidency, tracked delivery patterns, pilfers goods during prime times, and subsequently resells the contents via several internet accounts. This was coordinated illegal action breaking many federal laws, with a possible 3 to 5 year federal prison sentence. The formal allegations against Nancy included mail theft, wire fraud, breaking and entering, and organized retail crime. The news that Nancy had been enabling illegal activities via her HOA authority struck the community like a bomb. Those who had been afraid of her policies now realized that her fixation on control had been hiding for something far more evil, using her access to everyone's personal information and delivery habits to methodically plunder her own neighbors. The lady who had positioned herself as the defender of community norms had really been the greatest menace to community safety. Many of the neighbors said they had thought something was amiss with Nancy's behavior, but had been too scared of her power to ask questions or speak up. 3 months after Nancy's imprisonment, Maple Grove had evolved into the kind of neighborhood I had first intended to find when I moved there. Our first official action was to change the community regulations to concentrate on real safety and neighborly assistance rather than arbitrary aesthetic rules and monitoring of resident activities. The people voted me in as the new HOA president. In return for a reduced sentence of 30 months in jail plus $78,000 in reparations to her victims, Nancy Carter admitted guilt to all federal charges. Children were once again let to play in their front yards without fear of being reported for imagined violations. The Neighborhood Watch program we developed actually brought neighbors together instead of pitting them against each other. Nancy Carter saw herself engaged in chess with a silent artist who would never object to her harassment and stealing campaign. Turns out she was playing checkers with FBI investigators working a months-long case against her. Though it occasionally arrives late, justice brings handcuffs and a perp walk in front of the entire community. Welcome to the new Maple Grove, where community values really mean treating people with respect and compassion, and packages are safeguarded and criminals are convicted. And should you be a HOA as well? Karen, reading this and considering using your position to pilfers from your neighbors, keep in mind that those packages you are looking at could contain federal tracking devices and a one-way ticket to prison, courtesy of neighbors who refuse to be victims anymore. Not just art supplies. I appreciate you checking HOA Journal. Show someone that enjoys a good plot twist in this video.